Hello everybody, Dr. Dave here. Welcome to Tipsy Vervet. The purpose of our podcast is to help people make sense of life and create meaning. While what we talk about is based on our own experiences with addiction and helping other people who are overcoming addiction, the principles that we share are universal, and we think they'll be helpful to anyone who aims to better understand themselves and who wants to cultivate a life that's worth living, regardless of what their past experiences might be.
I'm Pierre, and I've been involved in the addiction community for over a decade. This podcast is independent of any other work we do, and we're in no way affiliated with anyone else. We hope that the spirit that comes across in our conversations is one of compassion, and that you find it helpful. Hello, and welcome to the podcast. I'm here with my good friend David. Here, what are we going to talk about today?
Let's talk about meaning. The last few episodes have been talking about a life that's worth living. And I thought maybe we should start by just putting that into context. What we mean by a life that's worth living. When we start drinking, we are motivated initially because we feel good. And drinking takes away pain and difficulty of a difficult life. And it helps us to manage our emotions. And the first thing that alcohol does, of course, is it causes, the medical term for this is a case of the fuck-its, right? It takes away all anticipation of future consequences. And so whenever we are faced again with a situation that makes us uncomfortable, we have learned, which is a very, very powerful form of learning with substances, and alcohol is just a drug, right? Like any other drug, very, very powerful form of learning that it makes life bearable. This learning is very difficult to override, which doesn't mean that it's impossible. It's possible to learn to behave differently. But for some of us, that learning actually remains. And so this is one of the reasons why we often hear people have returned to drinking after a sustained period of abstinence of maybe sometimes some years. And the commonest thing that we hear is they say, I took my eye off being attentive to my life. And this is the reason why. Because initially when I start using, I feel good. Then in between my drinking, I feel not so good, feel bad. So after a while, I feel good. But then while I'm not drinking, I start to feel bad. I start to getting some withdrawals from my drinking in the period when I'm not drinking. And so what happens is this is what we call the impulsive period, where I impulsively drink. In other words, whenever I feel uncomfortable, I just automatically drink without giving any thought to the future consequences. And what happens is that it takes away that bad feeling and I feel good. But for many of us, where we find ourselves after a while, is that drinking actually doesn't help us anymore. We feel bad, and then we drink, but we also feel bad again. We still feel bad. And what happens is we're just continually trying to escape from this feeling of unwellness and badness and agitation and anxiety and a strong desire just to get out of my own head, feel comfortable again. And so what happens is we drink to escape that. And this is where the drinking becomes compulsive. In other words, I can't not drink. I have to keep drinking just to try and get away from the badness I feel. I have a term for this. I call it chasing the escape. You're continually chasing this escape to feel the way I feel. And this is where we fall into active addiction, or heavy drinking, because not everybody becomes an addict, but most people, when they reach this stage, they at least become physically dependent on alcohol, which makes it very difficult to stop. The addiction side, we've spoken about that in another podcast, is about what's happening in our mind and our head, actually. So what we call this here, where we're escaping the bad to feel good. We call that a positive reward or a positive reinforcement. We are drinking because we get something positive out of drinking. This part here, we call this where we feel bad all the time and we're trying to escape feeling bad. We call this a negative reinforcement. We are drinking to escape something that is negative. So initially when we drink, we experience a positive reinforcement, but soon that positive reinforcement fades into the distance and that our drinking is maintained by negative reinforcement. And this is a terrible place of feeling trapped. I used to say to my wife, I feel like I'm trapped by an evil force. So I want to stop drinking, but I can't. When we emerge from the dark wood of addiction into the lights of abstinence, our motivation to remain abstinent is exactly the opposite way around. So what happens is when we learn to be abstinent, we notice that our life is falling apart, actually. Our health is suffering. Poor health, poor relationships. There's financial consequences to it. There may be legal issues. We can't work, we can't study properly. And very importantly, our life lacks meaning. We can't, in other words, our reason to carry on is to continue drinking, actually. There seems to be no point in stopping. It's quite a dangerous place to be, actually. It seems like it's hopeless. And we discussed it. We'll come back to that. Not so hopeless as it sounds. So all of these are reasons to become abstinent. But if you notice what's maintaining our abstinence here, when I talk about abstinence, I mean not drinking, right? It doesn't necessarily mean your life will be fantastic, but it certainly clears your head so you can face whatever comes your way, in whatever way that might be. And for many of us, that requires help from other people, at least initially. But you'll notice that our reason to become abstinent is to escape from all of these negative things, even if it's just from the way we feel. You know what it's like to be locked into this compulsive drinking, this feeling of ants crawling under your skin, this incredible sense of anxiety all the time. I'm depressed a lot of the time. I don't feel like doing anything. I can't imagine that I'll feel pleasure from doing anything. And because of that, I don't want to do anything, so I become completely apathetic, which makes doing anything very hard. I'm not motivated to do things, and when I do start doing things, I don't persevere with them. My relationships are suffering, and people are angry with me, and as a defense mechanism, I turn around and I say, okay, well, you don't understand me. You don't know what it's like to be, you don't know what it's like to be me.
Yeah.
You're not understanding enough. And then all of our thoughts, of course, become tainted by these addiction and depressive thoughts, which are caused by our using, but they emerge from our brain, so we think they're ourselves, we think they're our own. I'm no good, can't do anything right, always letting people down, I'll never amount to anything, I can't stop drinking, I don't want to stop drinking. These are all symptoms of addiction. And many of those will start to pass if we give ourselves the opportunity to live without chemically altering our brain. And when we stop chemically altering our brain and we start to do things and we start noticing that we actually are doing things that we never imagined that we were going to be able to do or didn't want to do when we were drinking, and we start noticing that we're doing those things, then our whole perception of ourselves starts to change and we notice our thoughts start to change. very important to recognize that one of the biggest symptoms of addiction, and it's in common with symptoms of depression and symptoms of anxiety, and of course all drugs cause depression and anxiety, are these self-flagellating thoughts, these self-critical thoughts, these thoughts that I'm no good. But we must recognize that those are not us. Those are symptoms of an illness. They are symptoms of addiction. And they will start to change when we give ourselves the opportunity to not. When we take away the cause of those thoughts, they will stop over a period of time, and we will learn things are different. But it's important to recognize that when we stop, of course, initially what's happening here is this is a negative reinforcement. It's worth staying abstinent because we start to put some distance between us and these negative feelings. We start to feel better. However, if we just concentrate on this negative reinforcement as the distance between our drinking and our new life starts to lengthen, in other words, our period of abstinence becomes longer and longer and longer, and we notice that our life is getting a bit better. What happens is the motivation starts to decrease. And I think this is one of the reasons why people can often return to drinking after a sustained period of abstinence. It's because the reason to stay abstinent has faded into the distance. It's not as powerful as it used to be. And this is what they mean when they say, I took my eye off managing my life. And then perhaps even there's some event that is very uncomfortable, and their brain has learned that this is how I cope with a difficult life, and it's been simmering in the background, this crafty little piece of your brain here that you're not below your levels of awareness, and it says, come on, if you're feeling a bit crappy, have a drink, you'll feel better. And this motivation to stay abstinent, this remembrance of how it used to be, has faded into the distance, and so without even thinking about it very often, it's easy to return to it. And if you're an addict, one drink will send you back into the spiral down. Absolutely. So we find ourselves where we are. So what we need to do is this negative reinforcement is extremely important, and it's extremely valuable to begin with. And it's important that we don't forget what it used to be like. This is one of the reasons why when we go to groups like Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous and some of the rehabs, we talk about what it used to be like. It's like I've heard somebody talk about, why do the Jews talk about the Holocaust? It's not that we keep rehashing what it was, it's so that we ensure that it never happens again. And that's why we talk about what it used to be like. We want to help to maintain some of that remembrance that it was not a happy time. It was not functional for us. And we want to ensure that it doesn't happen again. But in addition to that, what we need to do is we need to put in here some element of this positive reinforcement. In other words, we can't just run from addiction. We need to have something to move towards. In other words, we need to be motivated to stay abstinent because it is worthwhile. We want to stay abstinent not because we don't want to go back to what we feel like, but we want to stay abstinent because it is worthwhile staying abstinent in the future. In other words, we want to be abstinent because life is worthwhile being abstinent, or then we want to go back to drinking. And for some of us, and you and I have completely different experiences, which I think we should talk about actually, one of these things. But for you, the desire to drink, you don't find that.
No.
Whereas for me, I still feel it very strongly when I'm exposed to different things and strong emotions. And sometimes I just want to get out of my own head. And I have to be very careful. And it's not a question of a daily battle to stay sober. It's a daily vigilance against allowing myself to slip back into And so if we're going to have something to work towards that makes it worthwhile staying abstinent, then we need to identify what that is. And one of the things that will help us to stay abstinent is a sense of meaning. And what I mean by meaning is that my life is worthwhile. It's worthwhile not drinking because I can offer more to the world in my whole state as a human being than I can offer chemically altered high drunk. Nice, call it what it is. So I wanted to just show you this. This is so important to recognize. So we talk about a life that's worth living as a learned, and this is why it's available to everybody, because we can learn to do it. But learning to do something presupposes a number of things. Right? The first thing is that I know what I have to learn. I need to identify that. I need somebody or something to teach me to do it. I need to believe that I can do it. But most importantly, I need to believe that it's worthwhile doing it. In step 2 of the 12 steps of recovery, they say we came to believe that we could be restored to a healthy life. And that's so important, that those first few words, like they came to believe. Learning, when you learn to do something, it means that you can't do it. I mean, it assumes you can't do it already, right? So there's no reason that you should necessarily believe that you can do something until you try to do it. And this is what they mean by came to believe. We made an effort to do it, and in doing it, not only did we get better at it, we experienced what it was like to do it. And in experiencing what it's like to do it, we learn that, first of all, we can do it. But assuming that that thing that we're doing makes our life better, we start to learn that it's worthwhile doing it. And so that's why very often what we need to do is to actually just do stuff, even in the face of not wanting to. And remember, if you are an addict or an alcoholic, which is an addict, often, not always, addict, you have been using substances, chances are you don't want to do anything. Most of us can't imagine we're going to experience pleasure out of anything because the drugs have hijacked this area of the brain that allows us to seek out pleasure. It hide the only thing that will motivate us to seek out pleasure is that thing that so powerfully took away the pain of living, and that was the drug. And now it's asking us to do something that we cannot imagine will replace that. And so the treatment for that is to do it anyway. To do it anyway, because when we do it, we experience that we might actually enjoy it. Gives us a sense of purpose, a sense that we have a control over our life, that I'm worthwhile as a human being. And very importantly, that will teach us that not only can I do it, but it's worthwhile doing. So what happens is very often the doing comes before the motivation to do. Doing comes before the motivation to do. That's why it's so powerful to cultivate around us the communities of people who are doing what we want to do, because they will help us and guide us and motivate us and hold us accountable to do even in the face of not wanting to do. It's so important. One of the most important characteristics of finding meaning is to spend time with other people. And if you want to learn to do something, you need to spend your time with other people who are doing it, right? So you need to seek out that community. So this presupposes that we remain abstinent, that we don't drink, and we need help to initially stop the drinking to break that cycle. So what brings our life meaning? Well, to be healthy, to have healthy relationships. I would say to people, if you don't have healthy relationships, why would you want to stop drinking? Right? It's so important to turn our attention to that, to participate in the community in the roles that we have, that we are there to fill. My role as a father, my role as a doctor, my role as a mentor, my role as a friend, my role as somebody who turns my attention to my own life and grows into who I can be, to participate in all of those things. My role as a citizen, to vote, to drive on the right side of the road, to stop at red traffic lights, right? To do all of these things that's required of me as a citizen, to participate. Because only in participating will I have a sense that I can contribute to the world, and therefore I'm of value, and therefore I am of value, and we are of value if we allow ourselves to participate. Many of us are not of value, not because we are not of value, but we don't share of ourselves with the world, so we don't reveal that value. It's not a question that we are not valuable as human beings. It's that we don't open ourselves. We don't allow ourselves to be vulnerable so that other people can get close to us and share of our connection. We spoke about equanimity. This is a very, very important part of life that's worth living. A learned, willingly maintained, healthy lifestyle with equanimity and meaning. So equanimity is that I can handle whatever comes my way because I know that my life will be okay because I can handle what comes my way, because I've learned by doing enough things, by facing enough things, that I manage to handle them. And it may be very often that handling something, managing something, meant that I asked for help from somebody else. But with their help, I was able to overcome what happened. And so whatever comes my way, I can overcome that as well. And we said that this requires us to be authentic. So all of these things will help to make our life meaningful. Notice that if you are not abstinent, you can never be healthy. Even if you have to take medication or have psychotherapy, they can never work. How can they when the chemicals in your brain are going like this because you're drinking 2 bottles of scotch every night? You know? You can never be healthy. Your relationships will never be authentic. They will probably never be happy. You will never be able to offer to yourself fully into a relationship because you are never yourself. You can never be authentic because you're chemically altering your personality. You can never participate if you're not abstinent because you're not yourself. How can you? How can anyone even get to know you? You'll never have equanimity because you'll never know where you are. You'll never know. I mean, this was the worst thing, wasn't it, about blacking out and things like that? You know, the person for whom our drinking was most scary was ourselves. Everyone else knew what to expect. They said, oh, well, you're going to be drunk by 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and then we avoid you. You know, let me know you pass out on the couch at 10 o'clock, if you're at home. God forbid. But for us, incredibly uncertain. How much will I drink tonight? Where will I be? Who will be there? What will I do when I black out? What will happen tomorrow morning when I have to face the consequences of doing the things I never would have done had I not been drunk in the first place? And I did without proper control of my faculties. It creates a terrifying, terrifying illness. So, abstinence makes this possible. And these things which give our life meaning make abstinence worth it, even in the face of not wanting to remain abstinent, even in the face that it's easier to chemically alter emotions because I can manage life that way. So let's have a look then at some of the things that will bring us meaning and where I can find meaning in my life. And we often hear people talk about 2 things, right? Meaning and purpose. So people are encouraged to find their purpose in life very often. I'm not sure that's a very helpful thing because what is our purpose in life? I think that if we throw ourselves into something with gusto and, you know, enthusiasm and authenticity and with careful consideration what that might be perhaps, remembering let's not overanalyze everything because making plans without doing anything is a complete waste of time. You've got to do something eventually. But when we throw ourselves into something and we give of ourselves to it, it can become our purpose. We all have a purpose anyway. I mean, for many years, my purpose was to get up in the morning and make sure I had enough to drink for the rest of the day. It wasn't a very helpful purpose to myself or the rest of the world, but that was my purpose nevertheless. But it was completely devoid of meaning. My life was not worthwhile, and I wasn't able to contribute. So what will give our life meaning? Well, first thing that I think, and we've done a whole podcast on this, so I'm not going to talk about it too much, but is to pay attention to ourselves, to gain some sort of self-awareness. Who am I? What do I want out of my life? How can I contribute and offer to the world what I have to offer? To turn attention to what I want out of my life. Who do I want to become? What do I want to do? How do I want to earn my living? How do I want to contribute of myself? To turn attention to other people. What is it that they need from me? What can I offer them? What can I accept from them reasonably? To turn attention to what I'm doing so that I get the maximum out of what I'm doing and not to let life just pass me by. To everyday activities, to the things that I'm grateful for. And we discussed this gratitude list in a previous episode. Gratitude list is the little things that happened today that I'm grateful for. The small things. I went to the shops, I had what I was looking for. I didn't have to keep looking. Tiny things. I had a nice conversation with somebody. I did a podcast that I really enjoyed doing, these sorts of things. I drove somewhere. It was a really beautiful drive. The only way I can be grateful for those things is if I turn attention to them. And when I turn attention to those little things, I recognize there's just so much beauty of things in my life. There are big things we can be grateful for too as well. But it's those little things. That's why a gratitude list is different every day. To notice the beautiful things around us. Very importantly also, to notice things that I did that were good and right today. To notice that the things that I did, the way I interacted with other people, the things that I did today that will still remain tomorrow are worthwhile. And that those things in my life had meaning today. And things that people did that were nice for me. So that's the first episode. We did a whole episode on that, so it's worthwhile, I think, for people to have a look at that if they haven't seen it so far. Now, very importantly, where do we find meaning in life? It's to do stuff. And as I mentioned, for many of us, we've grown up, especially if you grow up in a chaotic home, in a home where your emotions aren't validated, perhaps you're criticized a lot, can't do anything right, perhaps you've been conforming yourself to meet the expectations of your parents or the community around you, and so you've never been allowed to be yourself. And in fact, you might not even know who you are. And we've done a podcast on authenticity, which gave a very brief overview on what that might mean and how to start cultivating some sort of sense of who you are. But it may be if you've grown up in that type of environment, you don't really feel like doing anything. And many of us have this sense, we call it anhedonia. This is a symptom of depression. It's a symptom of addiction. And it's a symptom of a life unlived, is a sense that I don't feel pleasure in things. I don't look forward to things. I don't want to do anything. Most importantly for us, very often, the sense of anhedonia. And anhedonia means an absence of, right? Hedonism, right? Pleasure. Drugs, sex, and rock and roll. Right? That's hedonistic lifestyle. Absence of, and I'm not suggesting you turn to drugs, sex, and rock and roll, although, it's a consideration. But many of us have lived that already, right? And it didn't work out so well.
Yeah.
So that's not necessarily the place to look for meaning. But this sense of anhedonia is that I don't anticipate I'm going to feel pleasure because the only thing that was able to take away the difficulty of life was drinking. And now that I've removed that, I cannot imagine how I'm going to find meaning in things. How am I going to manage social situations and be with people when I feel so uncomfortable with people. And what that does, of course, is it cultivates a sense also of apathy, because I don't imagine that I'm going to feel pleasure. I don't want to do anything. I'm just apathetic about things. So, treatment for anhedonia and apathy is to do it anyway. To do it anyway. I'll say to people, it really doesn't matter how you feel about this. Do it anyway. Because there are three components to doing something, right? There's the anticipation and the planning. Most of us hate that. There's the doing of it. Maybe it's something we wanted to do, but we didn't imagine, it just couldn't be bothered to do. Or maybe it's something we didn't want to do. But often when we're doing something, we find all of a sudden that, in fact, we're totally engaged in it. Time has just slipped by. We don't know. And then I turn inwards and I recognize, actually, I am enjoying it. And sometimes I do things that I don't actually enjoy that much. And the third thing that comes from doing something is what happens next. It is so important to recognize that nothing comes from nothing. If you don't do anything, nothing will happen. But if you do stuff, there are always consequences of doing it. So maybe someone invites you to play cricket and you hate cricket, but you say yes anyway, right? And you go and you meet someone there who does motor racing, yeah? And they say to you, come on, let's go to the motor. I'll take you next week to come to the motor racing trip. And you find you love motor racing. And it opens up this entire new world for you of watching and being interested in a whole new community of people you never would have met, who now share your interests and your beliefs and your values, and open up a whole new world of activities and thoughts and excitement that you never would have had the opportunity to be exposed to if you hadn't gone and played that cracky game of cricket, right? So it's so important to recognize that sometimes things are worth doing just because they are worth doing it. It doesn't need an outcome. It's worth doing it just because it's worth doing it. And so do things that are fun. Play. Playing is really, really important. If you notice what happens when we play, it takes us out of the real world. Play often has boundaries as well. Notice that it's one of the things that makes us feel secure as a human being is rules. We hate uncertainty. And people say, I want to be free, but most of us actually don't want to be free. We want the certainty of knowing that there are boundaries in place. If you think about it, you can drive your car anywhere you want in the country, but it's the rules of the road that keep that journey safe. When we play a game, it's fun playing a game. You play a game of soccer, but the soccer has rules. We each know what's required of us, right? And that's what makes the game worth playing. And so we find that we're enjoying the experience of playing. We're enjoying the experience of being with other people and sharing a common activity. And when the game is over, then we return to the world as it is, but we return refreshed and as a new person, perhaps. So it's really important to do things that are worth doing just for doing them. Very importantly, to do things also with a sense of accomplishment that do have some sort of outcome, because it's this sense of accomplishment that will give me a sense of self-worth, that my life is worthwhile. I did that. Just even tiny little things. They always talk about doing service at meetings. We're talking about addiction community meetings. Things like putting out the chairs and things like that. These are tiny things. And they're talking about these things sounds a bit trite. You put chairs out at a meeting and you look around the meeting, you're sitting on that chair. I put that out there. But if I didn't put that out there, you'd be sitting on the floor. Just getting a sense of self-worth, that I'm of value to the community by doing things with a sense of accomplishment. And that what I did, the time that I spent doing that was worthwhile. One of the things that we can do, in addition to things, of course, that are related to society and which are related to work, some sort of output where we earn an income from it, where we can see that the sense of accomplishment, the sense of having achieved something has rewards to it, which enable us to live meaningfully and to do other things and to be self-sufficient. That's really important, right? Because there's a lovely sense of meaning when I know that I am responsible for my own life. I'm the one that is enabling myself to live, to be self-sufficient, that I'm not a burden on other people. I'm not just a taker. I am not only in a position to maintain myself, but I'm also in a position to give to other people as a consequence of it.
And that feeling as though I'm a burden, such a common theme that comes up everywhere.
Right. Yeah. Which is another reason why I drink, right?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about delayed gratification at some stage as well.
Yes. All right, let's speak about it. Let's, yeah. Another place where we can find meaning, and it ties in a little bit with the sense of accomplishment, is to do creative things. Creative things are so important. They're an expression of myself to the world. They are an expression of my own soul. When I talk about creative things, I mean things like art, music, drawing, poetry, writing, pottery, woodwork. And other things, that photography, gardening, some dance. I can create just by moving and sharing that with other people. I might choose to share my creative pursuits, and I believe we should. What sharing all of this requires of us is to be vulnerable, of course. If I'm going to share of my soul, if I'm going to bear my soul open. So, for example, we do quite a lot of creative things, but one of the things that I love to do is to write poetry. And poetry is an opening of yourself to the world, and it makes you extremely vulnerable. And I read other people's poetry, and 97.6%, 97.61% of it I don't like. I don't get it. It doesn't make it good or bad poetry. I don't get it. It doesn't do anything for me. So I don't anticipate that my poetry's hell of a good. So like 40% of my poetry, I like it. The point is, there's no such thing as bad poetry, because it's an expression of yourself. There's a hell of a lot of poetry that no one else wants to read. But it really isn't. It is bearing your soul on the page, right? And it's a wonderfully expressive and cathartic exercise. And you do it for yourself. If other people like it, then that's great. But you do it for yourself. But you can contribute enormously to the world too by sharing your art, Other people love to share that with you. But you have to be open to that. Realize there will always be people that criticize you. One of the things that is going to, I don't believe you can ever derive meaning without bearing yourself to the world. Because we're social animals. And there will always be people who will criticize you. Always. There was a lovely speech that one of the early American presidents gave. I can't remember off the top of my head now, but he was talking about the man in the arena. You can find it on the internet. And he says that if you're the man in the arena, there will be people in the stands who watch you and criticize you. There will always be the people who are not doing anything who will criticize. It's the people who do things who are criticized. And so doing things does call of us in some extent to be open to that, to know that we are vulnerable to that, and to recognize it from whence it comes. Yeah. And also to cultivate around us the people who will champion us and encourage us. And doesn't mean that our poetry will always be great. And you may say, Dave, I don't get that poetry. And I'll say, hey, but you know what? It's meaningful to me. But here's another one, and you say, yes, that one's better. So, all of these physical pursuits, moving your body is extremely important. So I'm going to put down here, this is a separate topic, part of meaning, a learned, willingly maintained healthy lifestyle. So we talk about health separately, but I do think that health is a part of meaning, and so part of this health is, of course, not only our physical health, what we eat and what we drink, but our mental health, what we pay attention to, which we mentioned, and cultivate this ability to face the world, everyday world, without falling apart, which often means that we have to cultivate around us a sense of community. And so I'm going to put that down next, and that is relationships and community. So we've spoken about in a previous episode why community is so important. Community is supportive. There are people in the community who will be able to teach us what we want to learn to do, who will support us in that. A community will hold us accountable. It will help us stick to our values and what we've identified to be important. And it'll give us a sense of belonging and meaning and an ability to participate and contribute to other people. And let's add into that, when we talk about relationships, the relationships are not only with people, but also relationships with nature. Spend time in nature is incredibly cathartic and can be very peaceful, very good to help us manage, to just reach a peaceful state, right? So spending time in nature is one of the pillars of wellness. And to nurture something. We spoke about that, to nurture a person, to nurture a plant, to nurture an animal. All of these things require us to be present. And that's why it's so important to have a dog with a tail. That's how dogs can eat. Something else that's really important in our community is to have people who will guide us, to have mentors. Now, we're talking about doing things right, so what are we going to do? We need to identify these things that we're going to do that are worthwhile and give us a sense of accomplishment. And so when we talk about community, connecting with a community is not just one community, of course. It's all of the communities where we have chosen to turn our attention to the things in our life that are important. So the pottery community, the abstinence community. If you want to learn to do something, you need to spend your time with people who are doing it. If you want to learn to be abstinent, if you want to learn to live without having to chemically alter your emotions, spend your time with other people who have already learned to do that. And we find that in the social groups related to the addiction world, the people that you call overcomers, people who've overcome addiction, who can teach us to remain abstinent even in the face of wanting to drink, and will teach us when we want to drink, what we can do to not have to drink. It's not about not wanting to drink. One of the things we do is we turn our attention. What does it feel like to not want to drink? Because when we turn our attention and we notice it doesn't take away that desire to drink. In fact, it might even make it slightly more powerful. Intense, yeah. But what it does is it gives us a choice on how to respond to it. If we notice it, if we pay attention to it, we know what it feels like. So having mentors in all of these different communities, if you want to learn to run a marathon, join a running club, have mentors in that. If you want to learn gardening and what will grow here, what will grow, have mentors in the gardening world. Have mentors in all of these aspects of your life. And you can find mentors by joining those different communities. When you're ready, you can be a mentor. Many of us are not ready for that. And for some of us, most areas in our life, we're actually never ready to be a mentor. But as we go on and we find what interests us and what makes our life meaningful, we will find some areas where naturally, in fact, you don't even have to think about it, find naturally newcomers are coming in, people who are new to the activity, and we automatically share of our experience with it.
When they grab it.
Yes. And so what happens is we don't even notice how we become a mentor. I think it's important to recognize that, because again, there's a lovely sense of, well, I'm contributing. My life is worthwhile. I can be of use to other people who were in the position I used to be in. And I can help to let them develop as I've developed. And they'll develop in their own way and at their own speed into something different, probably. But so it's really important to do that. One of the things about life is that life is uncertain. That's the nature of life. And an enormous characteristic of meaning is to cultivate wisdom. And there are a couple of characteristics of wisdom. And wisdom is learned. That's why we often think of wise people as older people. Not all older people are wise. And there are younger people who we often meet who are developing wisdom. And people are open to uncertainty, open to change. So a couple of the characteristics of wisdom that are so important to be aware of, because we will notice them in our own lives, and when we can turn our attention to them, we can notice how we embrace them. And some of them require just an acknowledgement, and others of them require cultivation. When I talk about a cultivation, I mean we learn to do it. And how do you learn to do something?
Spend your time with others and doing it already.
And by doing it, right? By practicing. So if you want to learn to speak a language, and we all have an aptitude for this, maybe some more than others, but we all have an aptitude to it. But you learn to speak a language by spending your time with other people who are speaking it, and by doing it yourself, right? The more you practice, the better you get at things. This is one of the problems with addiction. You get very good at drinking, because when we feel uncomfortable, we drink to take away those uncomfortable thoughts. So we get very good at diversion. We get completely physically dependent on it. Our body gets very good at drinking. When you start drinking, right, you can only have a couple of drinks, right? After a while, 2 bottles a day, Okay, you black out. That's pretty crappy, but I'm good at drinking, very good at drinking. I could only drink 2 glasses when I started. Now I can drink 2 bottles, right? I used to say, I don't have a problem with beer. I can drink 14 beers in a row. So 2 bottles of scotch afterwards, then get me. I've become very good at being depressed. I practice being depressed. I've become very good at being angry. Practice being angry. I've become very good at being hopeless because I practice being hopeless. Wisdom is the ability to embrace uncertainty, that life is uncertain. And this uncertainty in life, although often one of the things that makes us feel uncomfortable, is actually a lovely acknowledgement that things change. And what that means is that the circumstances around me change, but also I change. I'm not going to be the same person tomorrow who I was today. And much of that change is actually growth. I learn that I can handle things. I learn that things are worthwhile. I learn who can be of value to me and I can be of value to them. Who is worth spending my time with and who is not. Who shares my beliefs and my values and who does not. One of the problems with addiction is that we behave in a way that is not in alignment with how we think we are in our head. I think I'm a good parent. I think I'm responsible. I think I'm good at earning. I've got a job. I earn some money. But how do I come across? I come across I'm drunk. I'm irresponsible. I don't tell the truth. I tell lies to cover up my behavior. Say I'm not going to drink anymore, but I drink anyway. not because that's the person I want to be. It's because I'm locked into that. But when I'm abstinent, I have a choice on whether I return to that or not. And so things around me change, the world changes, but I change too. And that's lovely to know that I'm not who I will be, and I'm not who I can be. So I always say to people, the where you find yourself now is as a consequence of everything that you've been through up until now. And so to be who you are is not only, it's not a surprise, it's actually inevitable that you should be who you are, having come through what you've come through. And so it's okay to be who you are now and to accept that. But it's not okay to stay that way. So in other words, it's an acknowledgement of a starting point. It's an acknowledgement that I don't have to look back and continually with continual shame and guilt and blame myself, but to recognize that it's inevitable I should be here had I been through all of that, good and bad, helpful and unhelpful, and have a place to move on from. The starting point. I don't have to be like this anymore. Don't have to be like this anymore. So wisdom, to accept uncertainty. Secondly, very, very important, to learn from the past and to, as best we can, make helpful decisions based on what I've learned from the past so that I don't have to repeat some of my experiences of the past. And not just my past. And not, is that what you're going to say? It doesn't have to be my past. Yeah. What this does is it gives you a perspective, and you're able to take a view of what's happening and to put it into perspective and not imagine things that aren't real. And so we talk about often acceptance of the things that I can't change. What that means is that I acknowledge the way things are. It doesn't mean I sit back and just let anything happen to me. Acceptance is an acknowledgement of reality. If it's raining today, I wanted to go out and do pottery in the park. So I can't do that. It's not wishing things to be different. It's not pushing things away that I have no control over, or clinging on to things that I don't want to lose, but I can't hold on to. Acceptance is an acknowledgement of the way things are, not so I can just sit back and hand it over to my higher power, whatever that might be, but an acknowledgement of reality so I can make an informed decision on how to move forward, on what to do next. So it's raining outside, okay, so we do pottery inside, instead of just complaining about the weather. You know what I mean? So acceptance, to get perspective, is to pay attention. Attention is the bedrock of a life that's worth living. We keep coming back to this attention. We've done a whole podcast on attention, but we'll keep coming back to it because it is so important. Sometimes it's better to do what is right for the group than what is right for myself. To put other people's needs over and above the needs of myself. To put other people's emotions over and above my own emotions. And to do that, of course, I need to be self-aware, recognize my own emotions. So wisdom means that I am self-aware. I have a very powerful and strong sense of who I am. And to sometimes have what we call pro-social attitudes. In other words, sometimes it's better to do what's right for the group rather than myself. To have a sense of humor. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And to acknowledge other people, I think. Wisdom is a very, very social virtue. So we talk about empathy and compassion. Both of these, when applied correctly, are part of a wise person. I can see that you're hurting, and I might be able to help you, and I know what my abilities and limitations are so that I won't make things worse. lastly, I want to say there's a lovely book by I think he was Austrian neuropsychiatrist, Viktor Frankl. He was a Jewish man who was in the concentration camps in the war, and he noticed that some people survived and other people's didn't, and he wrote a book about that. He developed a therapy based on his observations called logotherapy. He wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, which is a wonderful, wonderful book. And but the first part about his experiences, while very harrowing, not terribly long, it's worth reading. But he talks about what he noticed in the people who survived is that they had a reason to survive. And he said that we could find meaning in 3 areas, which partly they're on our list, although we've got a few more things we've added. He said you can experience things, you can experience people, you can experience events like a sunset in nature and things like that, and relationships with people. You can create. And very importantly, you can endure suffering, knowing that there's a reason to endure that suffering. So there's an often repeated phrase, which again has become a cliche, that is based on what he actually said in the book. He said that anybody who has a why can find a how. Anyone who has a reason to endure that suffering can find a way to endure that suffering because they have a reason to do it. Now, he was in an incredibly appalling, traumatic environment that most of us hopefully will never be exposed to. And so it's helpful to identify areas in our life where that concept, finding meaning in suffering, or a reason to endure experiences, make enduring that experience worthwhile. And in doing so, not only do we find meaning in the outcome of that experience, but we can also find meaning in the enduring, in the experience of that experience. So if you look back on a lot of people that we admire in our own history, I mean, our country has, of course, Nelson Mandela, who had a very rich history which was characterized by different events. And I'm sure a lot of those things, he suffered greatly, but there was enormous meaning in that suffering because in his head he had a clear goal on why that suffering was worthwhile. Gandhi's another one. And there's many people throughout history who suffered greatly, but their lives had enormous meaning. So meaning is not equivalent to happiness. Happiness is not a goal. There's all this thing, the pursuit of happiness. If we pursue happiness, I don't think we're likely to find it.
Well, I don't even know what that means, really.
Well, maybe not. Maybe not. And we look for it in the wrong places because of what we imagine it might mean, right? Guess a comfortable feeling, a lack of suffering, a feeling of elatedness. I don't know. And so we look for happiness in the wrong places, and especially in materialistic goods and behaviors. I mean, we know we sought happiness through addiction because we were suffering in life, whatever the reason that suffering might have been. And initially, the taking away of that suffering was comfortable, but after a while it started to backfire and we felt bad all the time, actually. And we look for happiness in the wrong places. So you can buy the Ferrari, but for many of us, the Ferrari, the sports car, brings us happiness initially, but ultimately it's just a car and we're looking for the next thing. Happiness is not a goal. Happiness is an outcome. When we pursue this life of meaning, we will often notice that we are actually happy because happiness is an outcome of doing things and spending our time with other people. But if we look back in history to a lot of these people whose lives had enormous meaning, they suffered. It wasn't associated with happiness at all. Happiness and meaning are not equivalent. Meaning is a completely different thing. It's a much deeper spiritual characteristic of being a human being. Whereas happiness is an emotion that is created by experience. You were talking earlier on about delayed gratification. So I put this in that category, right, of suffering towards because it's worth suffering at the moment. So I really want some ice cream. That's a bad example. You give me an example of the right? For
Pregnancy, perhaps?
yeah.
It's a lovely example of delayed gratification, for sure.
Or anything during which I suffer greatly.
Absolutely.
But at the end, what you got a little creature, right? In your arms we used to have this phrase in our own family because it wasn't sufficient to say I love you because families don't love each other. It's something much deeper than that, right? I love chocolate. I love pottery. I love poetry. But we used to say I family-rise you. It's lovely. But studying is another one. I want to be a electrician or accountant or a doctor or somebody who's good at business or someone who can sail a boat or, so I will put some effort in and I will also sacrifice other things that I want to do. And instead of doing other things that I know would have brought me some element of joy and happiness, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to actually put some effort into something else, which will bear fruit later on. We'll have a sense of accomplishment, but not only do that, open up an entirely new aspect of life that I never would have had available to me had I not put in that effort. That I might not have really wanted, you know what I'm saying? I don't necessarily want to study right now, but I know that the outcome will be wonderful.
Yeah.
And perhaps give me more choices on what I can do with my life, because at the moment my choices are limited. But if I put some effort into learning to do something else, or studying to become something else, or to grow myself to become more of who I could be, then in fact the choices that I have in life start to expand and open up.
Yeah. That was very well put. I think that when we started talking about wisdom some years ago, you and I, we've built these lists that we put up over many years. But what I love about the process is that what I understood let's just use those 4 points on the page currently as an example. What I understood about those points 5 years ago and how that's grown and matured and enriched and what it feels like today is quite a different thing. Something that was incredibly important for me to learn was that I was able to find happiness or have fun without drugs and alcohol. That was one of my greatest fears. Is that, no, I can't have fun. I can't be the life of the party. Translation, life of the party, guy that causes the most chaos and falls asleep and they have to kick him out. So I really, really, really loved that. But there was something that you mentioned on the page before that I just wanted to, can we change it back, if you don't mind?
One of the reasons why we don't imagine how we're going to enjoy things without drugs and alcohol is because we've never done it before.
Exactly.
And it's not always as fun either, is it? It's different. It's a different type of accomplishment. It's a different type of meaning. I'm not going to use the word fun again because it might not be fun. It's a different type of meaning. And it has a different meaning to my life.
Well, it's incredibly important for me in my own life to do what you've just said there, is to stop. We were talking about labeling in one of the episodes before. Not label it good or bad, because immediately it has a valence. It has a, you know what I mean? It's positive or negative. What about
it feels good or it doesn't feel good?
Right. Or helpful or unhelpful, whatever you want to way you want to frame it. But my life isn't better or worse now. It's different. It's certainly the different that I want when I compare it back to what I've got a framework, comparing it to the old days.
Yeah. And it's very difficult, isn't it? It's difficult to imagine something different. It's like saying, imagine a color you don't know. How can we imagine a life that we don't know? Because we don't know it. Maybe that's where we need to recognize we don't know that we don't know. If I don't know what my life is like and I recognize that I don't know what my life is like, I can pay attention to my life as it's changing into something else.
And by extension, when you follow that process, what I've found is that becomes so much more meaningful because of the fact that I'm putting into place these little steps that we keep talking about. It can't not be a consequence for so long as I'm practicing these things like virtue, for example, with sincerity. The caveat to all of this kind of stuff to me is that it must be done with vigor, with vim and vigor, authentically, and to the best of my ability, certainly. Halving anything is never brought.
Which comes back to what we were saying to begin with, right? How do you learn to do something? You have someone to teach you, you believe you can do it, and you believe that it's worth it. And so we need to be vigilant to what's happening. If I embark on a journey and I find along that journey I don't believe in this anymore, then change it.
Exactly. And well, that just plays into why I wanted to come back to this page with regards to having a mentor. Being a mentor took a long time. I started being a mentor relatively early into my own journey of abstinence. I needed a few more years, if I'm honest. Maybe I'm not even ready now, I don't know. But it doesn't change. I know what my intentions were at the time, and they were pure. And I did help some people, and I didn't help other people. But it was part of the learning experience. One of the luxuries that you and I have is the massive amount of people we meet each week in the recovery communities. So all of these things that we're presenting in this podcast, it's not new knowledge, and most of it's not even our own knowledge. We put it to our own words, and we've certainly thought through the processes ourselves. But you can trace all of this back as far back as you want.
The ancient wisdoms aren't
absolutely
basic wisdoms. What you say, paying attention, the examined life.
Right.
Virtue, a way to behave that relieves suffering, to carefully consider what I do next.
And then
community, friends.
Here. It sounds like such a simple recipe when you just narrow it down to the simplicities of things. Like the things we've written in this book over the course of this podcast. If I just took that book, I've got the key to having a fruitful life. But reading, presenting, talking, doing all of these types of things is not doing. And what I've noticed is that the longer that I practice or try to practice these principles, the more comes so second nature to me that I'm almost getting the benefits of the rewards without having to put in nearly as much effort as I had to put in right at the beginning.
Well, yes, because it becomes a way of living. It's a learned, exact lifestyle, learned, willingly maintained healthy life.
And that's the point.
And also what's worth doing is what we've been talking about is, okay, so we talk about the examined life, we talk about virtue, we talk about community, but to what is it that each of those things bestows on us? What is the benefit of those things? I mean, there are so many benefits of a community, but you and I had a drinking community when we were drinking. And that's community, isn't it?
Yes.
So what makes that community different to the pottery community or the running community or the abstinence community?
Maybe it's a good time for you to talk about community identities then now, seeing as it's come up.
Well, each community has a purpose. The drinking community, our purpose was to drink. Our purpose wasn't to be together. It was nice to be together, and we met people at the drinking. What I did is I drank on my own, but I mean, you did, Well, that's not true. I didn't always drink on my own. So you meet people there with the intention of getting together, but the outcome of that drinking ultimately was not helpful. It had a purpose, but it didn't. From it did not emerge a life that was worth living.
Because it's missing too many of the characteristics that we were been taught.
Well, I felt ill all the time. It didn't have health.
Exactly.
My relationships that were really important to me, my family, and I lost all of my friends. In fact, I lost all of my friends that I had. I had gone through university, I learned to be a doctor. Very difficult for me. And I'd shared that experience with a group of people. An experience that most people never experience. I was thinking about it recently, actually. I can't compare it to anything else, but I mean, learning to be a doctor is very difficult. First of all, it takes a lot of effort. There's a lot of sacrifice that goes with it. But once you start being a doctor, you are surrounded by ill people and dying people. I think we often underestimate that. So the community that you progress through life, through that work, we've shared something. And all of us have something like that. I'm just using it as an example because that was my experience. I lost all of those people in one fell swoop on one night because I got horrendously drunk and blacked out and behaved extremely badly. So whilst I had the drinking community after that, the relationships that were really important to me that could make my life worth living, that could make my life easier, that could make my life one in which I could continue to face being a doctor because I had the support of the other people
And enrich your life.
that was gone.
Yeah.
And in fact, I did develop a few new friends after that, and the same thing happened again. Lost them all. But what remained was this false sense of it'll be okay because I can just drink it away.
Find more people.
So I think, that's what I say. We have the community, but if we ask ourselves, well, what do I get out of that community? What does that community do for me? How does it enrich my life? It's not helpful. And yet, when I joined the pottery community, the dancing community, the abstinence community, my life is rich and full. And most importantly, it allows me to contribute. I don't think in the drinking community I contributed anything except for my presence.
And some money.
Except for my presence. Sure. So, I suppose that, that's the difference. It's not that these things didn't exist specifically.
Yeah.
They were in a different form. And your life takes on a whole new texture and coloration when you emerge into something that's different.
Exactly. And having a mentor and being a mentor, we say this all the time. I've not experienced a feeling like the feeling of knowing that I've truly been of value to another person. The caveat to that obviously being without expectation of something in return. There's no feeling like it. Helping another person, it's motivating in and of itself. And because I want more of that. I like this. I like the connection that I feel to something bigger than me, whatever that might be. That is certainly a way for me to stay connected to whatever the biggest thing is.
Yeah.
And that's its own, hesitate to say it's its own addiction, but you can't, no, not in this context, you're right. But once I've tasted that, once you've seen, you can't unsee.
What you mean is it's giving you a sense of meaning in itself.
Of course.
Your growth in meaning gives you a sense of meaning. That's what I was going to say. When you say, there's nothing that will give you a sense of meaning like knowing you've made the difference in the life of another person. It's also wonderful to be able to share what you've learned, because it also reinforces that it was worthwhile learning that. It brings you back to what you were saying about delayed gratification. It was worthwhile going through it. This is one of the funny things, isn't it? It almost says that it was worthwhile me being an alcoholic so that I could emerge from that into who I am now.
Absolutely.
I have no idea who I might have been, but who I am now is okay. And I wouldn't be that had I not been through all of those things too.
Well, going back to your thing of inevitable, it's inevitable that I should have gotten to where I got to with a life of destruction. But it's also inevitable that I've gotten to a life that I actually like my life. And that's inevitable as a consequence of all of the effort that I've put in and following these principles and spending time with the people that I've spent time.
Yes, the effort that you put in. Yeah. So it's all very well, as we say, making plans and writing all of this down. And it is important to write it down. If you write it down, it enables you to see it objectively and to put it into practice. It's so important to write. Writing is very, very important. But writing and sitting and planning without any action is just... it comes to nothing.
Yeah. Would have said futile. I suppose nothing is futile, but it's certainly unhelpful.
It helps you to make sense of things, perhaps, but you need to put that into practice to let it have outcomes.
Yeah. That was good. And just one thing that I did want to touch on that I've been thinking about quite a bit lately is this idea of being a mentor and things like that. And this is the first thing I say to anybody that I mentor: make very sure that I am not the only person that you are speaking to about this. Just because I found a mentor in the pottery community doesn't mean that I can't have another mentor. Maybe I meet somebody who's a world-class pottery maker and he's got expertise and experience and things that my current mentor doesn't necessarily have. Nothing wrong with having 2, 3, or 5, or whatever the number is.
And we don't have all the answers either.
No.
So I always say to people, if it sounds really wrong to you, it probably is wrong for you. And get additional advice.
Absolutely. I can't stress the importance of second opinions, especially with big decision making. And the more I become comfortable speaking to a wider range of people about things that make me vulnerable, essentially, the more I have enough information to make informed decisions.
Yes, and again, coming back to wisdom, right? Perspective. How do you gain perspective? Well, perspective assumes that you have experiences which don't have to be your own to gain perspective from.
Yes.
If you have only experienced something, and especially while you are drunk, you don't have a wide perspective of, and your decisions and actions will be based on, that whole thing about
A very narrow scope.
the blind men around an elephant, and the one touches the trunk and says it's a snake, and the one touches the leg and says it's a tree, and the one touches the tail and says it's a vine or something, and the one touches the ear and says it's something else. And it's an elephant because they just have one small, tiny perspective of it.
Yeah.
And we do face the world like that. And it's important to recognize that sometimes when I need to make a decision, I just don't have enough information, don't have enough experience. And so to be aware of that is important. And who do I go to ask for help? Because there may be people who are the wrong people to go to.
Possibly. It's an interesting question when you raise it. Like,
I was just saying about WhatsApp said, well, you don't have one mentor.
absolutely. Look,
People for different things.
sure. The barometer that I have is that it should be somebody that has benevolent intent and that wants the best. Now,
There you go.
you can't, but I don't always know. If I meet you today for the first time, how would I know either of those?
Yes.
But if we're in the same pottery community and I spend a couple of weeks with you, I'll very soon get to know your personality and whether it's mutually beneficial for us to, You and I are only sitting in this podcast because I went for that cup of coffee that day, 10 years back, whatever, that I didn't want to go to. And you've told me in the past you also didn't want to go to the coffee that day. And yet, because of that cup of coffee in that place on that day, my life is so much richer.
Yes.
For having had the privilege of, spending the amount of time together.
Yeah. So we talk about these three or four things that are really important in life is what you pay attention to, what you watch and what you listen to, because that informs your perception of the world. And again, then it comes back to how do I choose what I pay attention to? Because remember, when I pay attention to something, it comes at a price. It means that I'm not paying attention to something else.
Yes.
Secondly, who I spend my time with. And as you pointed out, spend your time with people who want the best for you. If you spend your time with people who make you feel less than, who put you down, who criticize you, and that doesn't mean the people who want the best for you are not going to challenge you, but they'll challenge you in good faith. And the ultimate result of that challenge should be that you grow.
Yes.
And thirdly, what you put into your body. Again, what you eat and how you exercise, but very importantly, what you watch and what you listen to. What you put into your body determines what will come out, what you have to offer. If you're paying attention to your things that make you miserable or sad or frightened or angry, or very importantly, and this is, I think, what a lot of the time media does, is it keeps us locked in to watch it or listen to it because it others us from other people. It locks us into a particular group where we feel we're right, and the people who are in the other group. This is one of Albert Ellis's great irrational beliefs, that people who don't agree with me are bad and should be punished. And you see that a lot in the media, don't you? I'm locked into a particular group, and the people who are not in that group or have an opposing view are bad
And wrong.
and wrong. Not only wrong, but they're bad and they should be punished. And again, it just completely blocks me off from any opportunity to learn.
Annihilates is a word I would be comfortable using in that context because it's so destructive.
Yes. And so I need to be careful. I mean, there will always be the potential for that. But if I'm aware of that, then I have the opportunity to seek out. It's not even to seek out opposing views. It's to seek out additional views, because everything's on a spectrum. Most things are not dim or dim, one side or the other side. And that whole spectrum in between is
Nuance.
People say, I can't remember. I've lost my alcoholic dementia. I lost my train of thought. But
Baffling that's spot on, but definitely a good place to end off today's episode. Thank you very much for tuning in. We value your viewership. As usual, we'll leave some information in the bio down below. And we look forward to seeing you until next time. Thanks, David.
bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.